Imagination is the essential faculty for any creative artist in any field. Here to discuss it with me is Thomas Warfield, Director of Dance at RIT. Thomas, thanks so much for coming into the spotlight today.
Oh, thanks for having me back again. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I often talk to a choreographer and I wonder, how do they work? It's such a creative process from the get-go, from the music and envisioning the whole process. What is your experience with all of that as you choreograph your works?
Well, dance and creating dance is a process of our imagination, our creativity, as really is everything in our lives. Imagination creates our reality. And so it's, in a way, different for the artist or the creative person than anyone else. The only difference, I guess, is that in the arts, in dance specifically, for me, we organize our imagination in a specific way. But people use their imaginations to decide what to wear in the morning, what to eat. And so we're always sort of this creative thinking going on. We just don't often acknowledge it or recognize it, but it's always happening. As a choreographer, I try to interpret the world as I think I see it, or as I imagine it. And so through movement. And so movement is, in a sense, a way of explaining or presenting or expressing our experience as human beings that does not rely on the linear thinking of verbal speech, for example, or even, I would say, the sort of linear cognitive way we do music, although music is very imaginative and creative. But movement really speaks in a language of its own, in a sense. Because, when somebody raises their eyebrow, we have an idea of what they're talking about. When somebody winks at you, when somebody waves at you, all of those movements of our body speak certain things to us. And so in dance, though often abstract in a sense, we still have a sort of visceral connection to that language that we're watching on the stage or wherever, on television or wherever. And that's the connection that we make as dancers to an audience. And in a sense, it's through the imagination.
So one of my guests recently on the spotlight was Robert Gardner from the Rochester City Ballet. And I asked him, what's the process, when you're working with a dancer? Do you demonstrate the motions that you want them to do, or do you write it on paper, or is there software? What's the process?
Well, Robert's a marvelous person, and I'm so glad you got to chat with him.
Yeah.
Well, every choreographer, of course, has a different process. I vacillate back and forth, I guess, between different ways of creating, but mostly I create without music and with an idea. And so I take an idea, let's say I want to do a dance about going to the store and buying milk. I think about that idea, that theme, if you will, and I think, what ways could I embody the idea of going to the store, going forward, going backward, going sideways, I'm moving some direction. How can I express the idea of buying milk? Gathering something, picking something up. So I start kind of there usually. And then I, in a sense, abstract those gestural based movements. So instead of picking up the milk, maybe I have this, or I have this, or whatever. So I begin on those small, almost incremental steps, if you will, to then build into something larger. And of course, dance may have nothing to do with going to the store and buying milk, but it gets my imagination going. Right now, I'm teaching a course called Creativity, Designing Movement. And the idea is to, and my students are, across all, some are engineers majors, some are gaming majors, so they're all different things. But I try to get them to think in terms of how can creativity inform and influence in other areas of our lives? And how is it already doing that? And how can I recognize it? So in that class, they create primarily movement, but not always, primarily movement to help them understand the timing of a certain movement, for example. That's different than this. The space, where in space we are when we're moving, and what does that mean? The shape that our bodies take with movement. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they all have different meanings depending on how you put them together. In that class, really imagination is a prime element in what I'm trying to, not in a sense teach them about imagination as much as get them to open to their imagination and to sort of analyze what's happening. And I think in that process, they develop a sense of their own ways they learn and the ways that they express themselves.
And how they may communicate with others more effectively.
Right, and how they may communicate with others. And yeah, that's great, actually. Not only how they communicate, but how they relate with others or communicate something to others, but how they listen back. Because the thing about what they're working on and cultivating right now in class is listening to their imagination. And so that can be applicable to other parts of their lives, relationships and everything else.
Right, and it seems as though they're already doing it. They just have to recognize it in a way and organize it.
Right, it's an awareness, really. And then it's partly an awareness. So yes, recognizing this is happening. Uh-huh. But it's also understanding how to use what that is. So it's not really just enough for them to be aware that their imagination is creating their reality, but then how do they use that imagination to create the reality that they actually want?
It seems as though somebody going into a technical field would have an analytical kind of an intelligence, or maybe a literary kind of intelligence, or a process intelligence, and this is a different kind of intelligence altogether.
Yes, it is actually, because, it is we kind of break things up, into critical thinking and creative thinking and right and left brain and all that. But in actuality, we don't function that way. We actually function as a whole. So even though we think of this as some, engineering or math or as critical thinking, you have to have creative thinking happening in order to actually do it. I mean, somebody even coming up with the idea of writing numeral numbers, that's someone's imagination.
Yeah.
So, it's all kind of part of the same process. And so again, it's recognizing that that's happening, and then how do I harness that and mold that, really, and use it in ways that help me. Even Einstein, what was that famous quote? That he said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And, I often add to that I believe imagination is a form of intelligence. It's not just a part of our intellect or knowledge-based thinking, but it is in and of itself an intelligence that we must nurture.
Fascinating. Well, we have some images of dance that you designed for a production here in Rochester, and watching that and seeing those pictures, I can even relive how powerful the movement was. It speaks to the viewer on a different level, maybe not an intellectual level, but directly through the body to the emotions.
Yeah, when we move, when we dance, our whole lives are about movement. So there is a visceral kind of connection that we all have that way. Everything about us moves. Even the blood in our veins is moving. Our breath is going in and out. Movement really encircles or encapsulates everything that we do. It infuses everything about our lives. And so when we can connect on such a depth level, I guess. With movement, it awakens something in us, and I would venture to say it awakens our imagination, because I think when we're moved by a work of art, a painting, a piece of music, a dance, a poem, there is a connection that goes beyond our rational thinking. It really doesn't have anything to do with thinking. And I suppose in a sense it has to do with feeling, although I think it's even beyond the feeling. I think it's a kind of innate part of our being that connects to this opening that happens with art. When you see something that you really love, a piece of art, somehow you're open to it. The world seems to open for you when that happens, in those moments. And so what I try to instill in my students is to understand when those moments are happening, and then to analyze how that's happening. And perhaps we can create that moment ongoing. And I think also this is an opportunity, a window into how we actually create better understanding between people, because we're already at this level connected. And if we can, in a sense, communicate at that level, it has the opportunity is there for us to really influence the other levels of our interactions and our lives as human beings. So I think it's really important that we do cultivate and nurture. That's why it's so important to have arts in the schools, because it's not just giving an appreciation for art, it's actually allowing that student to be aware of their imagination and then to be able to cultivate that imagination for use as a person, as a human being.
And it's not as though they're going to be artists for their lives, but that's a resource they'll have then for the rest of their lives.
Right, but they take these skills, and those skills are what they then apply to whatever they're going to do in life. Yeah.
So we just have 1 minute remaining, but some of those skills produced a very influential bust of a family member of yours. Could you tell us about that in a minute or less?
Yes. Let me just start and get through that a little bit. So my imagination took over, and I decided we needed a bust sculpture of my Uncle Bill, William Warfield. And boy, I tell you, just that little bit of an idea, that little bit of listening to my imagination created this bust, because I went to Sean Dunwoody, the artist, and asked him about creating it. I asked people to help fund it. I asked the Eastman School of Music to partner with us in getting it into the park at Gibbs Street. I asked the city of Rochester to help us install it. I asked RIT to help us pour the bronze, and that turned into a whole project for their school, their classroom. And then RIT also made a documentary video of the making of the bust. So just that one little idea, and this is a perfect example. Just listening to your imagination for a moment can spur so much reality.
Well, it's been a delightful experience to listen to your imagination for a few minutes today. Thomas Warfield, thank you so much for being our guest here in the Spotlight.
You're so welcome. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. In the Spotlight is a production of Penfield Television with sponsorship from Nokan & Associates, a private wealth advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Advisors. If you enjoy this program, please find us on Facebook, like and share the program, and find our full playlist on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.